Hi, everyone. Welcome to our 2:30 session, which is the intersections of social media, race, and social justice programming. I have Deirdre and Lanae here from the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Recently opened. It is beautiful. They killed it. It's amazing. So I'm going to turn it over to these fine ladies. We'll have presentation and then time for questions afterwards.
Hi, I'm Lanae. I currently manage the museum's social media presence, and
I'm Deirdre Cross, and I manage public programs.
We would love for you guys to share our presentation today using hashtag Museums Respond to Ferguson or hashtag MCN. So you've probably heard about that brand new museum that's been open for a little more than 30 days. Part of our museum's mission and vision is to stimulate dialogues around race, identity, and reconciliation. And that means our museum does programs from early learners all the way up to adults. We believe that museums can serve as powerful places for community dialogue by offering a space for conversation on difficult topics. Our goal is to do programming around these issues that really speak to the ongoing issues that African Americans face while doing it both in person and on social media.
And with that, I'd like to talk to you a few minutes about our audience and why it matters so much to us. Our social media and public programs teams work closely together to cultivate the museum's growing digital audience, which has expanded our audiences overall. NMAAHC, and even though it's not really something we do a lot at work, but I'm just going to say NMAAH here because
don't tell Lanae.
It's a little, to work this hard and really not get the acronym right is a problem. So we'll just say NMAAH is our little secret. But anyway, our public programs, every one of them embodies some element of our mission and vision statement by helping all Americans see the centrality of their stories and their histories in shaping the country's narrative, and exploring what it means to be an American and to share American values such as resilience, optimism, and spirituality as reflected in African American history and culture. I've developed public programs for the museum now for about 7 years and noticed that our audiences are strongly attracted to programs that explore race and social justice issues. The museum's public programs unit works with social media to promote dialogue and inclusivity in our events. And consequently, we welcome the power and flexibility that social media brings to our outreach. We think it's so important to help our audience engage with history whenever possible.
So how do we engage our audiences virtually? According to the Pew Research Center, 28% of African Americans who use the internet use Twitter, in relation to 20% of white non-Hispanic Americans who use Twitter. In addition, 11% of the African Americans who use Twitter at least once a day, compared to 3% of white Americans who use Twitter. Because of those statistics, it was important to us that we created a really robust Twitter strategy in order to get our information out to the public. One of the things that we wanted to do was to highlight all of our public programs using live streaming. That means that whenever we have an in-person program, we wanted to invite audiences in across the country and across the world so they can participate in real time. To support that live stream, we develop a live tweeting program where we're able to actually create connections between our museum collections and the topics that we discuss in our public programs. Oftentimes, we'll have influencers co-tweeting with us. We're sharing our collections in real time. So if one of our panelists tweets about, Black Lives Matter, we'll link to an object in our collection. If they're talking about police brutality, then we're able to link to objects discussing that in our collection. It's important for us when we have these real-time conversations that we can share relevant objects in our collection. In addition, we recently launched a mobile storytelling strategy where we allow people to get even more behind the scenes to our programs. So that means that when we do an in-person program, we are able to take them behind the scenes on Snapchat or on Instagram stories. So we're reaching out to our curators. I'm saying, Aaron, can you give us some context for tonight's screening? What relevant objects do we have in our collection? And we're going through our recently opened exhibitions and pointing out those objects and telling those stories and giving our Snapchat and our Instagram story fans a little bit behind the scenes details to support our in-person public programming. So how exactly did we launch our social justice programming initiative? On August 9, 2014, Michael Brown Jr. was killed by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. That his death ignited racial tensions and sparked a discussion nationally and internationally about race, policing, and community activism.
So several months after that, our director, Lanae Bunch, asked me to chair and assemble a committee to develop a conference that would present the Smithsonian's response to Ferguson. In the process, we would discuss similar communities in turmoil due to excessive policing and the economic and social triggers that led to such violent encounters. To put the program together, we employed a team approach. Our director challenged us to develop the program quickly, and the program that the conference that we eventually planned took place on April 25th, 2015. Which does not sound like, that sounds like a reasonable amount of time to put together a couple of panels, but in the Smithsonian, it always,
Takes time.
It takes a little more time, so it was really very fast for us, very, very fast. The conference that we developed was entitled History, Rebellion, and Reconciliation, Communities Mobilized for Social Change, and we assembled panels of scholars, the clergy, activists, former members of law enforcement, artists, visual and film, and digital influencers to explore the emergence of a 21st century civil rights struggle. Over 900 people attended the program that day. Other museums, by virtue of their smaller size or proximity to communities such as Baltimore, Cleveland, or New York, were able to respond quickly to these events. They were actually part of the community. MOC is not, as we all understand, in the St. Louis metro area, but the fact that our curators approached activists and citizens there to collect objects from their struggle provided us a way into their conversation. And our social media was extraordinary for how closely they monitored how other museums spoke about police brutality and activism. So when the decision was made to organize a response to Ferguson, we were able to turn to a community of organizers and members in that area who had, who were beginning to trust us and our intentions, as well as the digital influencers that Lanae and her team had collected to really put together some really wonderful panels.
So it was really important for us when we developed our social media component for our public programs that we had panelists who were actually active on social media. I think it was intentional because we wanted them to be able to help drive our hashtag, and also we could tap into an already robust audience. So that's why for this particular symposium that was day long, many of our panelists had Twitter profiles, they had Instagram, and they were sharing alongside us and also attending different sessions throughout the day when they weren't speaking. In addition, we also launched our Social Core program, which invited a group of museum professionals, history nerds, and digital influencers into our space where they had dedicated reserved seating in return for sharing their experience at our program online. And that really helped us drive our online conversation and had our hashtag trend in 3 major metropolitan areas when we had this day-long symposium. We really just wanted them to attend our program and to share that experience online so that we can tap into that digital audience and provide more context and more detailed discussion points. For our HRR program, we launched our social media campaign with the following goals. We wanted to provide context, facilitate the discussion, and showcase our museum's relevant collection objects, all the while supporting our public program by doing this in a digital space. HRR remains one of our most socially engaged programs ever, with our high of, I think, of 22.1 million impressions, which we since surpassed since our opening. But for us, it really inspired us to seek out other opportunities for the museum to engage in these robust discussions while highlighting our collections and highlighting those historical narratives.
So then, as a result, but we had, I have to say, for the time that the museum has had temporary exhibitions in American history, we really have looked at social justice issues pretty consistently over 7 years. But still, it was a pretty big challenge, HRR was. And then a few months later, we looked at the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We worked with... we wanted to honor the 50th anniversary of the passage of this act, and we turned our attention to the moral and legislative victory for the VAR of 1965, while also considering that the act itself was under attack as Shelby County, Alabama, successfully challenged key provisions designed to eliminate voter suppression. We wanted our audience to pause at this point in history and consider the impact of this action on communities of American voters and what would be the next steps. And so we put this panel together to try to help sort through what some of those actions might be and to consider the historicity of the whole event. We worked with members of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund that was actually celebrating its 75th anniversary of its founding by Thurgood Marshall. And we worked together with them to identify historians, legal scholars, and writers who discussed the importance of the Voting Rights Act and its protection to the rights of millions of Americans to cast their vote. The program's audience was made up, interestingly enough, of former members of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, many of whom had ventured south during the 1960s to register millions of people to vote, as well as members of the legal community and activists concerned with the rights of the formerly incarcerated who frequently lose forever their rights to vote once they are arrested and imprisoned. The program was designed to, and I think it did, energize our audiences about the responsibility of citizenship and to engage with the politics of their communities at all levels, and not just in election years, but to take the time to research issues locally that affect them, how resource management occurs in communities and so forth, so that they can continually impact and enhance the quality of their lives.
To support Deirdre's program, we also launched a social media campaign that highlighted the struggle for African Americans to achieve voting rights in this country. We have a really, really awesome photo collection where we were able to showcase the struggle, the way that people were hosed down in the marches in Selma, etc. And we were able to show that online through our social media campaign. In addition, we also used relevant objects from other institutions to provide additional context and insight. Our goal is to never offer a personal opinion, but to stay rooted in the facts. So we would like to take this time to do a little audience participation. And I want to ask you guys to look at your own museum. How many of your museums have actually hosted a program or a discussion around race, identity, Ferguson, or Black Lives Matter? Wow, so we have about 7 hands in the air. What are some of the reasons, for those of you who haven't had a discussion, that you think your institution has not gotten involved in that programming field? Anybody? Anybody? I'm sorry? That's a good one. Anything else? You can just yell them out. Good. Good.
Yeah. And for those that had I guess I could talk to you a little bit about that. both of these programs were highly scrutinized. We were always tested about whether or not we were presenting the both
Smithsonian.
sides. The scholarship was extremely important. A balanced point of view was extremely important. And I have to be very honest about that voting rights thing, because someone looked at a flyer that we had put together and complained about it, because in legal parlance, Shelby versus Holder is actually Shelby County, Alabama versus Eric Holder of the Department of Justice. But someone misread the flyer and thought that we had targeted Richard Shelby of Alabama and really politicized a public program that was really supposed to look at a very important piece of legislation. You'll see, or you might have already seen a slide where Sherilyn Eiffel, who leads the Legal Defense Fund, talks about the fact that in 1965 is probably one of the first times that America was truly a democracy, because everybody was going to get a chance to exercise their right to vote. So imagine how I felt. We were putting this public program together and trying to present a balanced view as it existed, and somebody just read it wrong. I mean, really just read it wrong. And then we spent hours trying to justify, that we were really trying to do the right thing. It just took a lot of time, and it was challenging and stuff. So I do understand your point of view, but we did what we had to, and we pulled it off. But for some of you that have done some successful programs, you have any comments about those?
I think it's important for us to also say that the opportunity to create programs around these issues is not up to African American museums. It's upon all of us to look at our collections and see how we can have discussions around these difficult issues. So what we really try to do in our programming is to relate it back to our mission and vision. I can remember how many times my colleagues across the Smithsonian are like, how do you guys get to tweet Black Lives Matter? Well, we're actively collecting objects related to Black Lives Matter. We're actively having programs that examine the issues that are important to this community. So again, if you can relate everything back to your institutional mission and vision, then I think that's a great way for you to start. Even if your vision does not explicitly state that you should focus on issues relevant to African American history and culture, or other marginalized groups.
I think that a lot of times because most institutions have such short vision statements, sometimes if you look at your collection, there's a great deal of flexibility there, because it is so short. If you have an emerging audience, or if the effort to expand your collections, you have a great opportunity to do that. I would suggest that you embrace that flexibility whenever you can.
A big part of what we did online too, and shout out to Aaliyah Brown and Adrian Russell for launching Museums Respond to Ferguson, was I was on Twitter seeing what the people were saying. African Americans make up 12% of the U.S. population, but comprise 22% of the online Twitter audience. So they really have the ability to drive discussions, and that's why sometimes you'll see the number one trending topic be hashtag Thanksgiving with Black families, et cetera, et cetera. So what are these people saying who are one of our core museum audiences online? And also hearing from museum professionals, like what are they thinking? What are some of the challenges that my colleagues have faced in launching their own programming related to these issues? In the words of this little boy, you have to listen, listen, listen. And in addition, it was really important for us as an institution, especially being a Smithsonian museum, that we always related it back to context. So that means for us, when we had our HRR Live program, we had a blog starting with the racial history of Missouri all the way back to the Dred Scott decision, leading up to today's current racial tensions. And I think for our audiences, it was important to see a museum in a cultural institution, especially being a Smithsonian, where we were able to have those discussions while, again, highlighting our collections. And I think they kind of liked it. So we got a lot of great kudos on us having those conversations. Wow.
And I also think that when you put the program together, it's important. We learned so much from selecting an interdisciplinary team, even within our own museum. And when we tackle larger programs, we still use the approach to engage the curatorial collections, social media, public affairs, and even finance to strategize how the way forward, and to, we all work on shoestring budgets, but I think even more critical is the fact that, these are extraordinary efforts to do these types of programs on top of the work that you already do. So it's good to have a team that you can assign roles to, that are motivated and excited and can move everything forward.
And I would just like to say, for me, when Deirdre invited me to participate in this program, I'm like, yes, because I had the opportunity to actually invite some of our panelists. I mean, we had Ava Duvernay on the stage discussing film and all those issues with our director, Lanae Bunch. And I think at that time, I kind of realized how big our museum was. It was like the sky's the limit. Like, we can really reach out to anyone and have them come participate in our museum. But it was also an opportunity for me to show leadership that social media was really important, and it was really one of the great ways that we were able to actually impact our community before we were open to the public. In addition, it was really important for us to reach out and make sure that the audience, I think for my colleagues and institutions that don't really cater to African American history and culture, to make sure that when you try to target an audience, that we're not perpetrating some of the errors that people have made in other institutions by doing tone-deaf programming that may enact racial stereotypes or offend people of a marginalized group. So it's important that when you're trying to build these audiences, that you bring in people from these communities into your institution and you listen to what they're saying. There's a great Tumblr blog called visitorsofcolor.tumblr.com that really goes out and speaks to how people of color feel in institutions and the museum spaces, and that's a great resource. There's online Twitter conversations. There's colleagues in the field. Like, I think it's important that when you're trying to have a program around race or social justice or LGBT issues, that you actually go out into the community and speak to the people who experience those issues, so that you can make sure that your museum is not on Twitter and there's not an article shared about how you felt.
Okay. And about that, actually, the inclusivity, and diversifying your audience, we can't just stop at the fact that we're an African American focused museum. There's diversity within the African American community. There are audiences outside the African American audience that we're trying to reach out to. And one of the things that I noticed as a result of our work in social justice is the fact that we received significant support for these programs by the LGBT community, Q community, in the ways that they intersect with all of these other issues. And I just was so grateful, because sometimes you step out, in support of these of social justice directed programs, and you don't really know. I mean, people might support it, and they may just let you know that they don't support it and they don't come. But this community responded so well. The support was so vigorous, and at times when we collaborated with other units to produce programming that was directed at this community, the embrace was just so strong that I feel that it is very important for us to keep the overture, the door open. And make this a group that we're going to be embracing and keep embracing. And I bring it up because we recently had a pre-release screening of Moonlight, a film that was written and directed by Barry Jenkins and based on the unproduced screenplay by Terrell Alvin McCraney. In Moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue, and this is a coming-of-age story about a gay man in Miami, a part of the diaspora. It's not said so explicitly, but you are led to understand that. And I thought, well, why not? Why can't we screen this film? Why can't we do something that addresses a story that so many members of this community can relate, that is so relatable to them, and we don't have to make a big deal about it, but we'll just screen it and they're welcome. And that's what we did, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
And to add on to that, for our Moonlight screening, we did a Snapchat story where we spoke with our curator, Aaron Bryant, about Moonlight and what this movie meant for people in this community. And we were able to get words from Barry Jenkins and activists who were queer identified, and also go through our museum, through our recently open exhibitions, and point out relevant objects. And that's something that we will continue to do in the future to give our audiences more context and relate them back to, again, our museum's mission and vision. At this time, that's it. Do you guys have questions? We're here. Yes. Sorry, I'm short. I can't see you.
There's no wireless mic if you want to go to the.
There's one right there that got.
Can you share a little bit about what your strategy was in terms of developing a voice or even content when it came to issues that were divisive among African Americans or within the community, or other issues where, you wouldn't necessarily expect that people would, have a consensus or necessarily agree with the way you were framing it?
Well, I think, again, all of our programming is rooted in historical facts. And when we had our HRR Live program, we intentionally had people on both sides of the issue. Mm-hmm. And that was something that Deirdre intentionally did to make sure that, we're not here to take sides. We're here just to offer space for people to have discussions and reflect on these things.
Yeah, well, thank you. Because I love that question, and and that is something that we thought about, because we invited a very conservative broadcast journalist to participate. You want to say his name?
I was going to say it was a great, robust conversation.
It was a really good.
The videos are archived on our site if you want to watch them. But
So we invited him to lead this discussion. Y'all can go to the website and see it, and you'll know who it is and stuff. But we invited him to lead the discussion, and here we have, some pretty leftist people up there and lefties in the audience. And he was doing his diligence. He had done his research and everything. And we were talking about mass incarceration and I guess economic oppression of the poor by local jurisdictions, by bonds and fines and so forth. And then finally he came right out with it. Like, I live in a community with a lot of elderly citizens, and we spend a lot of money on burglar alarms and everything else to self-protect, because really we do have issues with people just doing stuff they shouldn't do and being where they shouldn't be, and we like that they get arrested. Well, okay, so then, it was just, that was just one way that we grappled with both sides of an issue. We didn't know exactly when it was going to come up, but it did. Yeah. And thank goodness we had a legal scholar sitting right there that could kind of diffuse the discussion and maybe, bring a little enlightenment to the journalist who had spoken to this issue, that's one of the ways that we work through potential conflicts.
Yes.
So when you do social justice programming, are you really neutral? I mean, I think that there's a stand that's being taken just by framing it from a social justice perspective. I take great, and this is a separate comment, that's one question, but I have been very inspired by, can I say Namak's use of objects, objects to help frame relatively controversial issues. I'm in Chicago, and when you talk about police brutality or policing or the history of policing, it is a contentious issue. And one of the things that we've been really looking at is how to use our collection as a way to frame those issues. And really, a specific collection, the Afro-American Police Patrolmen's League, because they were on the inside doing the work in the 60s and 70s, and it becomes a way to kind of think about policemen as activists as well. So, but anyway, just go back to my first question. How can you say neutrality when there's a social justice kind of programming?
Well, it's interesting. I think that the neutrality and fairness is issue is of great concern to all of us, and especially to our director, Lanae Bunch. And I think that, well, I happen to know that we continue to meet with members of the law enforcement community to talk about social justice as interpreted through their experience. And I think in a very short time, you'll see other programs that will be developed by our museum rather, where they'll have a physical presence at the actual program. And we'll also, as Lanae said so eloquently, look to our collections, to add another layer of fact and neutrality.
And I think, I'm speaking from the social media perspective, I think that oftentimes when I share objects online, on Twitter or whatever the platform we have, it's just adding to the conversation. Everything that's going on today is ignited in historical roots. And I think that's important for people to remember, and that's what I really try to share online. And I don't think that us sharing a poster of someone being at a Million Man March talking about police brutality in 19, whatever it was, can relate to today. I think it's important for people to remember that these issues have been persistent and here over time, and our job as a museum is to offer that context. Somebody had a question.
We'll take one last quick question.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you guys, what your strategy is for haters. Like, how do you deal with
Blocking. So let me tell you something. Our social media staff of one has to deal with a lot of online, as you say, haters. So I created a community policy on our Facebook page, also on Twitter, and SI has terms of use as well. But I can pretty much tell at this point if people want to have dialogue or if they want to come on our page and be racist and leave comments. And like me and my colleague who runs like Big Brand, whenever she posts about our museum, she'll send me screenshots and like we have to go in regards back to the terms of use. But oftentimes, I mean, if someone says something racist or they're swearing anything like that, you're automatically blocked. At the end of the day, we're here to offer conversations and dialogue about difficult issues, and we're not here to offer an opinion, but there's a difference between wanting to have a discussion and want more versus being a racist. And I think that's something where we have to toe a very fine line. But I think we've got a pretty great formula, and I think I developed a community guideline strategy that allows us to block people who don't know how to act.